On behalf of the Professional Development Committee, I want to thank all of the Conference Planning Committee, all of the conference speakers for making this such a great event. We're in the home stretch, and we hope that the following sessions are inspirational for you, and we hope that these next sessions and speakers will force you to rethink how you and how we all offer our Master Gardener programs. Next, we have 4 speakers who are going to share their vision of the future of the Master Gardener program. We have Chris Cooper from Tennessee, Matt Jones from North Carolina, Jamie Harris from Minnesota, and Janelle Weir from Wisconsin. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to share your perspectives with us all today. And then this session will lead into our capstone presentation, Building an Inclusive Master Gardener Program by Tony Franklin. So to begin our Vision of the Future session, first we have Chris Cooper from Tennessee to share his perspective, and Matt Jones is next. So Chris, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. My perspective on the future of the Master Gardener program. Some legitimate and important questions that come to mind are, where would the gardening world be without our committed and precious Master Gardeners? Who do you think would have researched and be prepared to answer all of those gardening questions from the public who are interested in such an amazing and challenging art form? Who would teach the kids, those Master Gardeners of the future, about this important program and the importance of gardening? Who would tell their friends and family members about this impactful program? Thank you for your vision, Dr. Gibby. These people, our Master Gardeners, are willing to give their time and energy to help with something they have great passion about. And we know that passionate, driven people get things done. Master Gardeners are indeed creative people. Let us take a look at some of their accomplishments. They diagnose plant problems, write garden articles, plant demo gardens, teach and lead classes, help with research trials, and so much more. For some of us, they have become family. They become life friends. They are our biggest advocates. What would we do without them? In order for the Master Gardener program to remain relevant in the future, it must be visible. It must remain connected to the university system, which provides that research-based component and horticultural knowledge needed to educate others. It has to be committed to building people and leaders who will contribute to improving the lives of others. Our program should be a rock in our community. We need to create change in our communities through educational programs that are beneficial to all. Lastly, this program needs to champion the cause for stewardship and sustainability efforts through horticultural best practices in our communities. My vision for the future of the Master Gardener program is to reach those lifelong learners and volunteers who will increase the footprint and impact of research-based horticultural practices to benefit those in our communities. Coronavirus has given many people an incentive to try gardening. Advice on growing fruits and vegetables has become a priority to many apprentice gardeners. The Master Gardener program will lead the way in educating those in our communities about the importance and impact gardening can have on their lives and the world in which we live. Thank you.
Next, we have Matt Jones, who's going to share his perspective.
Thanks, Chris. My vision centers on making the Extension Master Gardener program the go-to place for science-based sustainable gardening information. But getting there requires, in my view, meeting three objectives. One, expanding and deepening education and outreach that promotes ecologically functional landscapes and home food production. Two, reimagining how volunteers are trained and the kinds of volunteer activities they pursue. And three, contending with the changing attitudes and abilities of volunteers that will emerge from shifting age demographics and increasing social and cultural diversity. Education and outreach programs, both for and by Master Gardener volunteers, should continue to emphasize ecologically functional landscapes rather than the monocultures of lawns and a few cliche shrubs. By this, I mean encouraging species diversity, using native plants when appropriate, considering wildlife enhancement, practicing sound fertility management, and the minimal but rational use of pesticides. Programs should also emphasize growing vegetables, fruits, and herbs, and managing yard and food waste by composting. As the recent crises have demonstrated, there is a great demand for this information, and we need to continue to meet interest in those topics. In short, home landscapes should help you feed yourself and feed and support wildlife and the environment, not merely serve an aesthetic function. The second objective is to radically rethink how volunteers are trained and what their volunteer activities are. It is now easy enough to readily obtain information online, so EMG training should not only emphasize finding and using appropriate extension materials, but expand on problem-solving skills and how to synthesize that information, which could come from more intensive or practice-based training and case studies. Training should also be split, in my view, in two different phases. The first phase of how to grow stuff classes like vegetable gardening or growing woody ornamentals should be open to everyone, not just would-be volunteers. These classes would serve as prerequisites for phase 2 training, which would be exclusive to would-be EMG volunteers and focus on diagnostic research and problem-solving skills. This method not only fulfills the agent's role in educating the public, but helps weed out people that are just enrolling to take gardening classes and not actually volunteer. Volunteer roles should devote more focus to education and outreach programs, assisting agents with implementing workshops or developing their own workshops. And those in turn should emphasize hands-on learning to differentiate them from online learning platforms. We must also contend with changing demographics and generational attitudes. Volunteer opportunities should be more modular and flexible, for example, answering questions from home or assisting with video production or managing social media. Some other important questions to ask are, will future generational cohorts be interested in volunteering? Will they be able to afford to volunteer? What will changes in home ownership and thus the availability of garden space mean for the demand and types of outreach programs and volunteer opportunities? EMG programs should operate ideally with perhaps fewer committees and meetings for the sake of meetings, which may inhibit volunteer participation, especially for younger age cohorts. Instead, we should structure programs around more fluid and ephemeral project-oriented teams. The next 30 years are going to look much different than the previous 30, and more challenging times are ahead. However, I think it is a great opportunity for extension generally, and the EMG program especially, because extension is grounded in teaching essential skills of resiliency in challenging times, gardening among them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing your vision. Our last speaker for our vision session, Janelle Weir from Wisconsin. And thank you, Janelle, for being here.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak more specifically on some steps and some things that we're doing with the Wisconsin project. The current Master Gardener program in Wisconsin does a fantastic job of serving audiences that we currently reach. And we all know who that demographic is. While reflecting on how to diversify participants and draw new audiences into the program, we realized that we first need to understand the needs of those new audiences. Under the current model, each county is responsible for organizing their own level 1 training. Some counties run completely unique programs, and others are utilizing a more standardized flipped classroom model with their distinctive additions. In the end, we have over 50 ways that the program is delivered. We've been working on reimagining the horticultural educational component and how separating it from the Master Gardener program may lead to more diversity in participants and better retainment of volunteers in the long run. We're currently creating a standardized, centralized online horticulture course called Foundations in Horticulture. The student will have control over when they will engage with most of the material, including pre-recorded video lectures and discussion forums. Although there will be a few live webinars, students will have access to the recordings in case they are unable to participate live. The course is modeled after the Achieving the Extension mission through volunteers, and cohorts will be divided geographically and then facilitated by county educators throughout the state. To maintain a local connection and emphasize the value of the local educator, labs are built in where county educators can introduce concepts and activities that are of interest to their local community. This can be a great opportunity to introduce students to the Master Gardener program. The goal of Foundations in Horticulture is simply to provide a foundation in horticulture education, rather than developed and delivered selectively to prospective Master Gardener volunteers. However, after taking the course and engaging with the online learning community, students will be prepared to pass the exam that's required to become a Master Gardener. We're casting a wider net. We know that there's a need and a desire for evidence-based horticulture education in our community. Separating the horticulture education from the Master Gardener program will hopefully engage some who perhaps wouldn't have heard of the Master Gardener program otherwise. We're also opening new pathways to become a Master Gardener. Eventually, prospective volunteers will be able to enter the program through self-study, prior education, and of course, the online Foundations in Horticulture course. In addition, we're developing a standardized online orientation course for the Master Gardener volunteers. It'll give all volunteers, regardless of where they live, the same introduction to the program. I'm excited that the investment of volunteer development made by the county educator will be more meaningful, since it's only going to be delivered to the participants who are interested in the volunteer program. We're hopeful that opening up new pathways to the Master Gardener program will help us reach new audiences. These changes are an effort to center on, as opposed to simply accommodating, persons from underrepresented and underserved communities. We are ensuring that our efforts are in service to the community, framed by their desires, interests, and goals.
Thank you so much, Janelle, Matt, and Chris, for sharing your perspectives on the future of our Master Gardener program. What interesting insights to hear from people from around the country, different states, obviously with different goals, but I hope that some of those ideas resonate with you and can help improve the programs that we're all offering across our country. So I want to introduce Tony Franklin, our capstone speaker for the conference. Tony is the Director of Field Operations for the University of Illinois Extension. Besides being one of Extension's leaders at the University of Illinois, Tony serves in lots of roles. Equal Employment Opportunity Officer for Extension. He monitors civil rights, affirmative action compliance. He's a member of the Joint Committee on Socially Responsible Licensing and Investment, and a member of the College of ACE's Diversity Committee. Tony also supports staff in adapting extension programs for diverse audiences, so that we provide audiences for everyone out there, not just those who look like us, but also for those who don't look like us. Tony credits his work with the Crow Creek Reservation High School in South Dakota over 30 years ago for sparking his passion for creating equal access to education. And Tony says his passion for doing the work is to help people learn about each other, learn about differences, and bring people together around difficult subjects. Tony joined the University of Illinois Extension in 2001 as the Knox County Extension County Director, and that's where our paths first crossed. It's hard to believe it's been almost 20 years ago that I met Tony when I was interviewing for my first job out of grad school back in 2003, and I really owe my whole career to Tony for giving this kid a chance. So thank you, Tony, for your friendship,
You're
your
welcome.
leadership, and taking the time to share your message today. Your mentorship during the 6 years I was able to work with you in that Knox County office really helped to mold and shape me as an extension professional. And I'm honored to introduce you today. So please welcome Mr. Tony Franklin. And he's going to give us a presentation on building an inclusive Master Gardener program.
Okay, with that said, before I begin, I would be remiss if I didn't. You might already did this at the beginning of your conference, but I'd like to just take a little bit of time to acknowledge the lives of a few individuals: Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and more recently Jacob Blake. Also, in addition to these, I'd like to take time to acknowledge those communities and citizens that are impacted by the hurricanes and the wildfires. All these things are on top of COVID-19 have played a major impact in our lives, and it's hard to get into front of any audience without even thinking about some of these issues. Chris gave us a little bit of talk about things, but he gave us a little bit about our background, but I'd just like to share real quick. I want to thank each one of you for being part of this, and I'm going to try to share some things that hopefully you better take home. As I looked over your agenda, you had things on there like overcoming D&I barriers, the presence of diversity, and inclusion task force, which is in place. And I was very interested when I saw this thing about Cottonwood Community Garden, bilingual family gardening series. Some of the work, I'd like to hopefully during the Q&A be able to hear a little bit more about some of the DEI work that you're doing. But I definitely, before I get started, I want to commend you on that work. I was asked, as you talked about, I was just asked to talk about diversity and programs, more specifically how they relate to extension and master gardening. But I don't think this is anything new. It may not be novel. I just heard the last part of the previous presenter's talk. You guys are doing some great work already and on board with this. So it might be some repeat. It might be a refresher for some. But before I'd like to share just a quick story about Chris. Hey, Chris, I hope you don't mind. I didn't get permission from you before I put this out there, but he knows where I'm probably going. When Chris interviewed with University of Illinois Extension, he was fresh out of college, coming in on, I think, might have been one of his first professional jobs. And here's his Black guy asking him a question in this interview session. And I don't know a whole lot about horticulture. My family does, my brother and other people do. But I say, Chris, I said, answer this question. When is the best time to harvest collard greens? And Chris looked at me with this look on his face like, what? No. And he was being very honest. He said, I don't know anything about collard. I don't know if he even heard about collard greens, but that was kind of fun. It was kind of a nice intro how we got to meet. But even with that, I mean, we were able to connect, and I think back to some of the bike rides we used to take, and getting up early in the morning and going out on some bike rides. I wish I was still doing that. I can't say that I am. I'm afraid to go out now with the way the culture is today. But with that said, I don't want to put Chris in the ground too far, or bury him too far, but just wanted to share with you a little bit about my home, where I grew up as a little country boy. Anybody been to the Greenbrier Hotel? This is, I used to work there back in the 70s as a bellman. I used to come home with anywhere between $150 to $200 in my pocket, cash money that I was taking home in my early 20s. The lady that you see to the right there, she was the best known secret in our hometown. Until I saw the movie Hidden Figures, I had no idea that Katherine Johnson had this kind of notoriety in our community. She's a mathematician. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions that she made to NASA. She was one of the very prominent females that worked on that team, along with Mary Jackson, who was an aeronautical engineer, and then Dorothy Vaughan, who they talked about in the movie, who was the manager of the Black West Computing Wing of NASA at the time. So back then, things were so segregated. But it wasn't until I saw this movie that I was able to know that this day even took place. And on top of that, believe it or not, her sister was my 5th grade teacher, Ms. Coleman. So it's amazing that I had to wait for a movie to come out before I knew a little bit more about my history. I usually use the picture on the right, I usually use as a Zoom backdrop. I didn't put it on today because I'm working with the University of Illinois, which you see in the background. But New River Bridge, New River Gorge is beautiful for scenery. I'm out of the mountains of West Virginia, and my son had me go out on this water with him, and you can see us out here taking a quick ride down the rapids. If you enjoy this kind of stuff, then we end up disappearing under the water on this slide here. I grew up in the mountains of West Virginia, Virginia area, hiked the mountains, waded through the creeks, and enjoyed the wildlife. Two of those pictures are pictures I took while I was walking down the street on my brother's property, and he farms a little bit, got a lot of mostly vegetable farming, and he's got a lot of fruit trees and things around his house. My sister-in-law just started doing honeybees. They got apple trees and pear trees and all that around the yard. But like I said, I grew up running around the mountains up in Virginia, up on Peters Mountain, where my uncle and Uncle Dallas and Aunt Jessie lived. And we did a lot of blueberry picking and huckleberries, raspberries. I mean, picking cherries all the time. I mean, we would just run up and down the mountainside having a lot of fun back in those days. But my uncle, he farmed. He only had a few hogs. They would butcher the hogs every year. We used to go down and slop them and do different things. And just saying this, just to give you a reference that just trying to get you to maybe change your thought about what Black people do. The other part is that I just want to share with you, my brother and I still do this thing about letter writing, and he and I, pen to paper. When I mentioned this to somebody, they say, "You mean to tell me you write a letter and you put it in an envelope and you put a stamp on it?" I say, "Yeah, we still do that." It's kind of a lost art. But in his letter he wrote, he said he always gives me an update on his garden harvest. And he said on his garden harvest from June 30 of this year, he said, he got on some dill, a few potatoes, some snow peas, some broccoli, onions, radishes, cauliflower, collard greens, Chris, got a little cilantro, poke greens, asparagus, salad greens, kale, and garlic. And he said, earlier in the summer, he said they ate some mature the holdover cabbages from last year that kind of came up. Said it kind of tasted and had the texture of collard greens, he said. So just kind of want to share a little bit with that. But the other part too, I have another cousin that lives on that same property that my uncle and them owned, and her husband own a gun shop in town, but they also enjoy farming. They built, and I wish I had a picture of it to show you, but they built this beautiful geothermal unit. And I don't have a geothermal unit, but I do have their American guinea hogs that they that they raised in. They also told me that they always resort to go to master gardeners when they have questions about different things, when they're working in their geothermal unit. But that's enough about me, and thank you for letting me share a little bit about my back home area, West Virginia. It's called Wild and Wonderful West Virginia. Some people call it Almost Heaven. If you know old John Denver's song, Almost Heaven, West Virginia, is our kind of our adopted theme song. But in 2001, like I say, as Chris had mentioned, that I joined the Extension family, and I encountered my fair share of blatant microaggressions as I came into the organization. The story goes, when I was interviewed, there was another person interviewed at the same time as I did. And word got back to me that she said, well, they only hired Tony because he was Black. I'm like, okay, I do have a degree. I do have some management experience. I was working as an associate director at another college before I took this job. This person didn't even know anything about my background, but she was still making these statements about me. Once I was hired, I was constantly being asked a question about, they say, well, what do you know about agriculture? What do you know about ag? that question kept popping up all the time. And it's like, well, Extension, we do a little bit more than just agriculture. I attend a lot of farm bureau meetings, ag roundtables, all those types of meetings in which I was usually the only person of color. That in itself, it was a story where one of my colleagues, a white guy, Harley Nosher, he was in his probably early 60s at the time, I'm guessing. But when I was at this one meeting, he was the keynote speaker. He got up in front of the Farm Bureau annual meeting. He goes, everybody should have a friend like Tony Franklin. And he said, Tony, would you stand up? And I stood up, and sometimes it's good to be black because my face probably would have turned very, very red. So it was this whole thing is like, you know, being put in those situations, but he was trying to make a point and said, look across his room. He's the only person that looks like him in this room. And that's what we need to look about and change. When we go into functions and say, who's in the room or who's at the table, and wonder why do we don't have different people represented in those functions. But you know, my credibility was always under the microscope, and regardless of the negative comments, I remained focused on my job performance and work that I did as I got exemplary performance reviews. When I was promoted early, and it was probably about the time Chris was still there, we never talked about these things that much, but one of my colleagues came up and said, you just got promoted because you were black. I said, man, here it comes again. And, you know, you don't have a response for those types of things, but I just want to put that out because as people of color come into an organization that's predominantly white, it comes with some bumps and bruises. Before I got on this call today, I had a call from one of our 4-H people, and he was saying, Tony, he said, I'm working on this project, and we're trying to improve our work and working with diverse audiences, reaching out to underrepresented groups. And we also want to be able to tell the story about how it is for us to work in an organization and the things that we go through. He said, I just want to make sure I'm protected. I said, what do you mean protected? He said, I don't know if people go file retaliation or what. And so he's nervous about doing this kind of work. And I just had that conversation less than 40 minutes ago. So you can probably imagine all these different comments and how they can make a person feel in the organization. We talked about being inclusive, and we talked about making people feel comfortable. Those things need to be at the forefront. And I'm sharing these stories because it makes it more real. I was part of a regional diversity effort. In this effort, the diversity experience, we took all our educators and county directors who went up to Chicago. We had an experience. We had kind of a little conference thing where we did some diversity training. We went through the privilege walk and all that. During the privilege walk, one of my colleagues broke down crying. I was like, well, what? All of a sudden he realized that his Hispanic heritage that he didn't want people to know about came out and he was kind of so embarrassed that he broke down crying. As we went out to do the other parts of the activities, one was to visit, to go to an ethnic restaurant. And I mentioned that I was wanting to go to an Ethiopian restaurant. And one of my white colleagues made a comment, and just like this, excuse the language, what the hell do they eat, rats? I was so offended when I heard that comment. And here's a person in the ag that it's a chance to see how food's being used by different groups, but the mindset was so narrow that they may not see what can be done. And we also went to ethnic grocery stores. The grocery stores we went to, as we walked in, I was listening to people making comments. Wow, man, this is really clean. Oh, this is well organized, looking nice. It has some really nice stuff. And when I heard that, my mind went to the fact, it's like, what were you expecting? You know, everything's gonna be rotten, things wasn't gonna be in order, the store was gonna be different than what you used to. So, you know, I look at these things often, and as I go through, I say, I weathered the storm. I want to make sure that the future of Extension, that as people come into an organization, that they can feel more welcome. You know, there were times when I wanted to just throw in the towel, but what good would that do? I share these experiences because in order for Extension to be relevant in the future, we must adapt and change to the demographics and develop a very, very strong commitment to DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion. and let that diversity, equity, inclusion work be the catalyst of everything we do. Diversity can be defined as a mix of cultural backgrounds in the workplace. Equity is basically the quality of being fair and impartial. And then the term inclusion, just want to break it down, while inclusion should be reflected in the organization's structure and cultural practices and relationships throughout the place we work. So when I can say something like this, I can say, well, diversity can be counting the people. And then we can talk about inclusion is making people count. So when you look at this picture right here, this is a group of African-American kids with their 4-H project at the thing. The first African-American 4-H group that I saw come to a 4-H show, I felt so bad for them. They walked on the grounds, and guess what happened? Everybody's heads turned, staring at them. They were under the microscope. I say these poor kids probably felt like they're out of place. Nobody walked up to talk to them. It's almost like they were like on display. We hope that we can get beyond those types of things and try to merge those relationships. Just another shot here, just showing the diversity in the organization. But as I talk about this, the U.S. Census publication titled United States Population Projections for 2000 through 2050, it talks about that the United States is expected to experience significant increases in racial and ethnic diversity over the next 4 decades. The size of the minority population is going to increase to the point that they present the numeric fact that we think that it's going to be more people of color than white people. And when this is referring to it as a crossover, it's called a new term, and you might have been hearing it already, the majority minority crossover, majority minority crossover. And this may happen in 2050, it may happen in 2055, but regardless of when it's going to happen, it's going to happen. The level of net international migration in the coming years will play a significant role in this fact. The size, growth rate, age, structure, racial and ethnic composition of the United States population. This is the why we have to do this work. The extent to which the U.S. population is projected to grow is partially determined by the level of net international migration. And as we know, the international migration also plays a part in shaping racial and ethnic diversity in our United States population. Over these next 4 decades, the most notable effects around this, we see that actually the Asian and Hispanic populations are growing at the fastest rates. The size is large structure. So even in the absence of net international immigration or migration, the size of the Hispanic population is expected to increase substantially as well. This is largely due to the current age distribution in the Hispanic population and also to higher fertility rates that are assumed for them. Additionally, the level of net migration is found to affect the timely and the majority minority crossover, whereby higher levels of international migration causes crossover to occur a little bit sooner. So when we look at this today, we have about 14% of our country's population is foreign born, compared to 5% back in 1965. Now I know some of you may not have been born in 65, but that was, and we also need to look at the other aspects of our diversity. We have the millennials born after 1980s are the new generation that we need to keep a watch for. And so are they likely to surpass the baby boomers, which is what I fall in, as the largest US generation. We look at the fact that 1 out of 4 people have a disability. We don't know these things. In 2017, 25% of the LGBTQ people reported experiencing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. As our workforce becomes more diverse, diversity-related incidences are on the rise. We refer to diversity-related incidences. You might see the acronym DRI sometimes in some literature, but the diversity-related incidences, like the ones I dealt with, incivility, disrespect, discrimination on the workplace. These things not only take place on the job, but they also can take place as you're working with volunteers in your volunteer base. give you a chance to look at just a little bit of trivia. I want you to think about how many people have heard of the Jessup wagon. Anybody ever heard of Jessup wagon? The Jessup wagon, historical fact. This is not trivia, this is a fact. In 1906, pre-cooperative extension, because if you know your history, cooperative extension was founded May 14th in 1914, if I'm correct. If I'm not, go ahead and stick a chat in there. We can talk about that later. But Tuskegee agricultural science pioneer George Washington Carver, he developed what we refer to as a movable school, a wagon which later became a truck, and bought tools and crops to farmers who would travel to Tuskegee. They couldn't travel to Tuskegee for instruction. So this same model, so people, it was like with extension, where farmers couldn't come down to the college, to our colleges to get education, they have to be out doing their work. It's the same model. This model of extension that we have was founded here. This is a piece of our history that is very seldom talked about. Knowing this rich history helps us understand. When I went on my first leadership program experience, we have this thing called NAILED in North Central Illinois, and the extension. And I think it might be national, it might be across the country, I'm not sure. But anyway, we had an experience where we went down to Alabama. They have a tricultural extension program because they include Alabama A&M, Auburn, and Tuskegee, even though Tuskegee is a private school. But there's a lot of, right now to the school, when we went out to Tuskegee, I had people in the bus looking out the window and they were seeing all these Black farmers. And they were like, I've never seen a Black farmer before. And I was kind of, I was kind of sitting there just soaking this all in. I was like, wow. So the experience was worth its while. But just to close up on the demographic piece, but the shift in demographics coupled with the increases in rise in poverty, our suicide rates right now, climate change, global warming, all these things that are going on, the COVID-19 pandemic, the racial and social injustice, and other societal factors will demand a more creative approach from us and extension as we think about what types of programs and who we're going to be offering our programs to. The future of extension requires us to continue doing the programs that are most needed, and we need to evaluate what needs to be discontinued, and that's so hard in extension. We have programs that have been on the books for years. People just don't want to let them go. But sometimes it's time to let things go and create something new. Develop new programs to meet the needs of the new emerging audiences. It will require us to seek non-traditional partners and stakeholders that we've probably never worked with before. In other words, we need to, in order to remain relevant in the future and meet these needs of what we're referring to, as I talked about before, the majority minority, it is imperative that extension become intentional in balancing our programmatic initiatives and recruiting for diversity and employment and in our volunteer base. And when the civil rights reviews come around, they always check in on these things, want to know what we're doing, how are we doing it, what kind of documentation do we have? And so we want to make sure we're doing all the right things. How do we have a more culturally competent staff? How do we have more culturally competent volunteers? It's going to require that we do provide the training. We do navigating difference training. There's a lot of schools have been doing that one. We have right now over 80% of our staff across the state have completed that program. We would have been at 90-some% had COVID not gotten our way back in March, because we were ready to do about 4 or 5 more programs between March and June. Let me just share an example of a strategy that our campus uses. And I talk about this because I talk a lot about history, and our country was built on, I say we need to relearn what we've learned, because sometimes we've learned so many things about our country that may not be true. So whenever we do a program here in Illinois, we're told that we need to recognize, it's called a land acknowledgement statement. And what we do is recognize the land that we stand on did not always belong to us, that it was before us. So the first order of business to open the meeting of any event is to first speak of the host, and know that by the end of the conference that we'll share this idea. But the land acknowledgements go something like this. It's basically a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native peoples, traditional guardians of the lands, that enduring relationship exists between Native peoples and their traditional territories. If your institution has a similar statement, it'd be good. If you don't, I think you'd like to try to think about doing one. So here's what this one says. So I will solve this. This was supposed to take place in Tennessee, and so I'm gonna use the University of Tennessee as in this example. It says the University of Tennessee has responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which it exists. In order to remind ourselves and our community, we will begin this event by recognizing that we are in the hands of the Catawba, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Muskogee Creek, the Natchez, the Shawnee, the Tali, Tuskegee, and the Yuchi nations. Now, those are a lot easier to say. We have some ones here in the state of Illinois, or we have, it's amazing the number of different tribes. But I guarantee if you take time to look at that in your own state, to see how rich that history is. But here in Illinois, we recognize the Peoria, Kaskaki, the Penobscot, the Wea, the Miami, the Mashugan, the Odawa, the Sauk, the Mashaki, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and also the Chippewa nations. These are the traditional territories in which Native Americans, prior to the forced removal, these lands continue to carry the stories of the nations and their struggles for survival and identity. Like I say, as land-grant institutions, we have a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of the lands and the universities that we stand on, as well as the histories of the dispositioned of those that move beyond us. We also are obligated to reflect on and actively address the histories and the role that our university has played in shaping what's going on. As you work and reflect on your conference experience, I hope that you are able to take at least one nugget of information that I suggest in advancing your work or whatever work you're doing, that you can move forward with that. Now is the time that we have to be more intentional in our outreach efforts. We have to think about our programs. When we review our program contacts for each year, do we notice that if there's any change? Or do we see that we're catering to the same group of people? What outreach and recruitment strategies have you implemented? How many people of color have you developed meaningful relationships with? How many people of color have you invited to your house? Or gone out to a movie? Think about some of these things. Sometimes we have to be more intentional even in developing relationships, because we can't develop trust until we have the relationship. We have to get the relationship to get to the trust. The other thing I'd like to share too, we need to get outside, I refer to as our own echo chambers. We need to lean into our biases and lean into our discomforts. When I left West Virginia back in my early 20s and left and went to South Dakota and worked on a reservation, you think that wasn't scary? Old country boy, never been anywhere in life, really just around the state lines, if anywhere. And then I'm going all the way out to South Dakota and I'm not even sure what I'm getting into. But I found that the Native American experience, these people care for others. They brought me in and treated me with such care as just like one of their family members. I remember when I was coaching, I went to this one game and some Native, the term they use sometimes, the word is skin. He came up to me, he goes, well, what kind of Indian are you, man? And I don't know. And he said, you must be Blackfoot. And he cracked up laughing, and it's such a humor about this, the fact that I'm Black and this and that. But those kind of stories, it made connections. And even to this day, this past week, I had a phone call from one of the kids that used to be at the school I worked at, called to let me know what the COVID situation was like on the reservation. He said that they're burying a person almost every day at the powwow grounds. Very devastating to have these conversations, to hear about these young kids that I work with, and how many of them have passed away. But those many relationships just don't disappear. They've been with me over time. So how do I find anything in common between me and them? And that's the key, because when we come together, and I remember when I've added some diversity to our Extension Council group, I'll always start with doing intros or do some type of icebreaker. We sometimes forget to, when we bring new groups together, we sometimes often forget that the first step in group dynamics is the gathering stage. And when we do the gathering, we need to do that each time we bring new people in. And so when we did this experience, when people went around and talked about, just talk about something that you really enjoy doing. Next thing you know, you heard people talking about they enjoy gardening. So it wasn't just the white people like to garden, it's the Black people and Hispanic people like gardening. So this made a connection that they had something in common. So I just wanted to give you some points to kind of walk away with. So as you have these discussions and engaging, and let me take a drink of water because I know I've been talking too much. Just bear with me. So as we move into these environments and we're working with these new audiences and developing programs, we always need to make sure that we're not bringing our, how can I say it? We need to come into somewhat neutral, almost like a facilitator in diversity training, always having that neutrality. Regardless of what I think, I need to try to get to hear what other people think. And our society, we have to learn how to listen. And if nothing else you get out is these points right here. Listening is so key to developing relationships, whether it be with your spouse or significant other, with your children, but it's so key. And my wife, I know that because I've been married we just celebrated 26 years, and it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't paying attention. And sometimes I had to turn the TV off when I'm watching football when she's saying something. Otherwise, she might take off and go shopping and come back with $400 or $500 worth of stuff. And she goes, well, you said I could do it. Now, I probably wouldn't even remember me saying it. But anyway, point one, we must learn to listen receptively. And what that means is we need to listen with empathy. Listen with the heart and not the mind. Empathy is the heart and soul of good listening. Stephen Covey, in some of my leadership work, he says, seek first to understand, then be understood. My pastor used the term, he said, we need to learn how to do what we refer as deep listening. Deep listening. So when we think about this, that's deep listening. So how do we get to this point? We have conversations with people, and we need to get beyond the surface level when we have these, engage in these discussions. That's easy to have, get into where, the first part of it, talk about cliches, this group, when we have these conversations, we get into the greetings and we can say, hey, how you doing? Slapping high fives, and maybe give us an elbow. We probably can't touch each other today, but give them some elbow bumps, whatever, or fist bumps these days. But you can get beyond that. Then you start getting to this place where you start talking about the facts. And then you start throwing your opinions in, interpreting the facts. And so, yeah, we get along pretty good in that mode. But let's take it a step further. When we get it down here into the levels 4 and 5 of how to deep listen, this understanding of listening, and key to it is steps 4 is feelings and emotions. Now, when I get into this part, when I'm talking about my emotions, and I tell somebody how I feel, and they tell me, well, you shouldn't feel that way. How can somebody challenge how I feel? Those are my feelings. And this is the level that we need to get to. We need to get to the point, and then the 5th point is we need to be transparent. And we need to be able to share those experiences. And like the ones I've been sharing with you, if we take time to hear people's experience, what they've gone through, and develop some empathy. And I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. It's not that. But boy, I've taken some bumps and bruises to get to where I am in this organization, and even through life. It hasn't come without some challenges. So when you think about this, there's some work that was done by Patricia Devine, and she always talked about this thing. We need to try on things. We need to try on new ideas. And you probably heard this, anybody's going to do any training, cultural competence training. Another point I want you to think about is to reserve or defer judgment. Reserve and defer judgment. Raleigh Washington says, help me understand what it's like for you. When I ask that question, help me understand what it's like for you, I'm breaking it down. I want to understand. on the reservation, it's the old adage to say, you know, walk a mile of my moccasins. So, you know what life is like for me before you start critiquing me. We need to respect each other's experience and expertise, and even sometimes respect our own expertise. We need to treat people with dignity and respect. And we need to practice what I refer to as both and thinking, you know, that there can be more than one truth, that my way may not always be the best way. There could always be a better way. And my wife challenges me on that all the time. She always say, well, you get the last word. I say, no. I always say, yes, honey, and that's be the last word. Whatever you say, honey. But anyway, I talked about earlier, like building trust. Trust takes time. It doesn't come with just having one meeting with a group, but you have to keep going back and going back to make it stick. Always assume good intent when you go into these discussions, and set some basic communication pieces when you're dealing with even with conflict. Of that, you talk about deflect, reflect, reject, or replace. So a lot of times we need to be able to learn or unlearn things, because some of the history that's been taught has not been true. So the first slaves that came over in 1620, does that sound right? When was the Mayflower? But there's things that happened before the Mayflower got here. And what I'd like for you to do is start, doing your own homework, doing your own research. But before the Mayflower was a book by Leroy Bennett Jr. was my first time in my life in my 30s. I was in my 30s before I even realized there was even a Black history curriculum, a Black history text. I knew nothing about it. I started learning about these things, and it just opened up a whole different level of experience. So there's so much literature out there that I'm not gonna overburden with that, but seek out information. Resist the urge to shout. Don't quarrel over opinions. When you come into it, learn how to listen. Opinions tend to divide us, and we need to try to figure out how we can find that common ground. And then, of course, we need to learn how to celebrate our successes as we go through. I mean, successes need to be celebrated. How are you celebrating those? What are you doing? What kind of events are you doing just to promote your diversity work? We must understand that other people's point of view is that every person's worldview is different. I have a friend in one of my groups I meet with every Saturday morning. He sent me an email. He said, Tony, I really appreciate you for helping me reflect on my own worldview. You've helped me see things from a different perspective. So as we're getting down to the end here, when you think about what we measure in our organizations, we usually measure what we value or what we praise. So my question to you is, what are you measuring? What are you measuring? What metrics are you using to hold yourselves or holding each other accountable? We do different things. We use in different systems to keep track of our contacts. We keep track of our volunteer hours. We do all those things. But are we putting some metrics in place in terms of how are we reaching out to new audiences? How are we increasing our diversity in our staffing? How many people have bilingual people on their staff? Do we put bilingual as a criteria on all job descriptions? Do we even put diversity, being able to work with diverse audiences, even as a item on that position description? Some of the key things that have been successful over time have been merging partnerships with some of the 1890 and 1994 land grant institutions, having exchange programs and things of that type. But it's not just having a partnership, but having a genuine partnership. And it's almost like when people come into the communities of color and do research, and they come out and they do the research, and then they go back to, I call it ivory tower, or go back to the campus, and the people never hear from them again. So once you develop a relationship, don't just go in and walk out, but maintain that relationship over time, and I guarantee it's gonna pay some big dividends. Establish new networks, as I talked about earlier, in partnerships with local grassroots groups and organizations, ethnic businesses. It takes some dedicated time to do that, and very intentional. As I said earlier, rethink your hiring practices. We talked about documenting all good faith efforts. What kind of efforts, and making sure you're reaching out to groups. Who are you advertising with? Do you keep track of who you're reaching out to? Do you stop a search if you don't have diversity in your pool, and to go out there and at least make an effort? So we may not get people to apply, but the effort has to be made. Be aware of the needs of persons with disabilities, those with limited English proficiency. Some of these audiences, sometimes they get overlooked because of the whole race relations piece. But there's so many people that we need to be able to cater to and provide services for. And to what extent of your public awareness is tied into all for your programs. So if I'm putting out information about my programs, if I'm just showing pictures of all white people in these programs, it may not resonate with everyone. So what some of the pictures I showed you earlier, it would reflect diversity. So when we go around, even in our internal audits and our reviews, we look to see, okay, when I'm marketing, what do these pieces look like? What do they look like? And who's in the pictures? So I would look around and say, okay, if you're putting together a report and I flip this book through this report and I don't see any diversity in there at all, we got to think about doing this better next time. So how are you contributing to creating an inclusive organization? I just want to leave you with a couple of resources. I know I'm probably over time, Chris. So just a few of them. You may have heard some, the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Action Guide is really key. Diversity, Equity, one for Extension. That website is one my partner and I from Purdue, we've been working hard to help build that site. The Curwen Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, it's got some excellent and also some really good resources in terms of funding. Allegories on Race and Racism, Camera Jones does a really good piece there where she talks about, and she uses plants as a model to talk about diversity. And then you have talked about Navigating Difference, which is housed, it was created by an extension agent of people out in Washington State. And then the one that's been created too for extension is the Coming Together for Racial Understanding that some of you might have already be aware of. So with that said, we definitely need to be committed at all levels of the institutions and our institutions, whether it be at the individual level, and we need to be able to create that friendly and welcoming climate for all employees and volunteers and our clients. In closing, I just want to read a statement from one of my colleagues, and this was totally unsolicited. It was at the end of one of our diversity training sessions where we have everybody go online and do this training every year. And this is what a professional wrote. He was a horticulture professional. He said, one of the main reasons I chose and am proud to work for University of Illinois Extension is his commitment to civil rights. While there is always room for improvement, and in parentheses, and probably a lot of improvement, it is wonderful to be part of an institution that is unequivocal in its commitments on this front. In an age with so much open discrimination, ignorant hatred, and willful enablement of all kinds of bigotry, it is wonderful to stand with a weighty and powerful organization that pushes hard in the direction of justice, fairness, and equality. I am aware of my personal privilege, but this work means a great deal to me, my family, and my friends. It enriches and strengthens our communities. It builds a just society that benefits all, even ultimately the most vocal opponents of American equality and freedom, unquote. I mean, that kind of sums it up right there. And this person here puts it pretty nice. It says, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up, you have to say something, you have to do something. And I challenge you today, as I close, when you see something, speak up, stand up, and do something. The future of extension is in your hands. And I'm asking you the question that you walk away with, what will you do? You know, thanks for taking time to listen to me. Let me be a part of this conference, participating. Know this is the capstone. You have a long week that you've gone through, but I look forward to a Q&A session and engaging with you a little bit more. But again, thank you for this time and this opportunity. And I can't say have a safe trip home, but a lot of people are already in their place. But I really appreciate your attention to what I had to share.
Tony, thank you so much for sharing that message with us. I mean, what will you do? I think those are great parting words for this conference. We've heard so many stories and shared so many resources with each other during this last week. What will you do? There's a great way to end this conference, send people off with something to think about. So Tony, thank you so much for being here, for sharing that perspective with us.
I promise that I did not change this picture while Tony was speaking, but this is the New Rewards Bridge, and I am a West Virginia native, so I was just in here texted, and I was really excited that that Tony shared some of that about his West Virginia background. And so we started this conference with a little bit of an analogy of the bridge. And so I just hope that in this craziness of 2020, that some of the things that we talked about today have been helpful for you as you kind of bridge what is some change that's going on in our extension programming right now. And we hope that you've taken away some great people connections and also some techniques and inspirational messages and elements that you can implement into your Extension Master Gardener programming. So of course, we would not be able to end without saying a few thanks to the fabulous folks here in Tennessee. If you sang Rocky Top in an accidental breakout room, or didn't hear background noise during presentations, or successfully went to a breakout room, those were my great folks that I have the opportunity to work with here in Tennessee. Many of them you saw in our last video. And as you, I'm sure, know, all of the day's sessions were planned by the great priority leads and the subcommittees of our Extension Master Gardener National Committee. And so I am going to turn the floor over right here to Missy as the chair of our committee and let her give you a little bit of closing greetings.
Thanks so much, Natalie. I just want to reiterate Natalie's gratitude and the call out for that University of Tennessee Master Gardener Work Group. This group has been amazing. They have been working in the background for all of us to make this a seamless and really, really fantastic educational and networking experience for everyone. I also want to say a big thank you to Dr. Franklin and to all of our speakers over the last 4 days. This has been truly an immersive experience in a virtual environment. And I think the fact that the UT team and all of the folks from the National Committee who contributed to this, the fact that that got pulled off is really exceptional in my opinion. I'm grateful to all of the participants. Thank you for being here. We do, you know, this is a conversation that goes on all the time every year. This is our community. These are our people where we are going to learn from one another to build up each of our programs on a county level, regional level, state, and also national. So I look forward to the ongoing conversation that we'll have. Again, many, many thanks to the UT Master Gardener Work Group for pulling this together for us. Thank you all so much for being here.
Absolutely. And no thank you would be complete without saying thank you all for engaging, for chatting, for breaking out, for visiting, for connecting. You all have been the most wonderful Zoom audience. And so, as Missy very eloquently said, this is not goodbye, it's until next time. And we just hope that this is a piece of the connection that we have the opportunity to do together as a National Community Extension Master Gardener coordinators. So join in October in our webinar. By all means, take part in a subcommittee effort. Check out the National Committee. We'll be having some regional rep spots open over the next year or so. See us at IMGC in 2021 and the next Extension Master Gardener Coordinator Conference, which will be in Savannah in 2022. So once again, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.